Italy was once an empire that dominated world football, but now they are gradually disappearing from the map of major tournaments. The shock does not lie in their glorious past with the likes of Paolo Maldini, Fabio Cannavaro or Andrea Pirlo, but in the present reality where the Italy national team has missed 3 consecutive World Cups, Serie A no longer holds its central position in Europe, and successive failures are exposing a decline that is more systemic than merely a matter of temporary form. Looking back at the era when Serie A was the destination for top stars, where Italian clubs dominated both tactically and in squad quality, the contrast with the present becomes clear and alarming. So what has really happened to one of the most traditional and once world-dominating football nations? From the 1990s to the early 2000s, Serie A was not merely a football league, but the centre of power for the entire football world. This was a period when Italy possessed an almost complete ecosystem, superior to the rest of Europe. Financially, Serie A attracted the most expensive transfers and had the ability to retain top superstars. Professionally, it was a tactical school where coaches and players were trained in an environment that emphasised discipline, organisation and pragmatism. At the club level, names like AC Milan, Juventus and Inter Milan not only dominated domestically, but also consistently won titles on the European stage, creating a chain of sustained success. At the national team level, this was clearly reflected when Italy entered the 2006 World Cup with a generation of players at their peak, rich in experience, cohesive in play, and almost refined by the very foundation of Serie A. The pinnacle of this entire system was the 2006 World Cup, not just a championship, but also proof of the synchronisation between clubs and the national team. Players competed together at club level, understood a shared tactical philosophy, and were trained in a deep-rooted environment where financial stability, league quality, and tactical identity all supported each other to create a true powerhouse. At that time, Serie A did not merely produce players, but also shape the way they played, developing them within a structure where every link, from youth development, transfers, tactics, to club operations, functioned as a unified system. Yet it was from this very pinnacle that the first signs of change began to emerge. The real turning point for Italian football came in 2006 with the Calciopoli scandal. This was not just an ordinary scandal, but a systemic shock that shattered confidence in the entire operational structure of Serie A. Allegations involving referee manipulation and result fixing exposed a hidden network of power behind the scenes, where certain influential clubs could affect sporting outcomes through non-sporting channels. When these details were revealed, it not only damaged the league's image, but also raised questions about fairness, the core foundation of any competitive system. The most direct and obvious consequence was Juventus, a symbol of Italian football power, being relegated to Serie B, stripped of titles, and triggering the departure of numerous key players. This was not merely a disciplinary punishment, but a sudden cut to one of the most significant centres of power in the Serie A ecosystem. When a key link like Juventus was removed from the top-tier environment, the entire competitive structure of the league was disrupted. Stability decreased, the quality of matchups changed, and the remaining clubs were forced to adapt to a new order that had never been naturally established. On a broader level, Calciopoli created a domino effect. Serie A's reputation in the international market declined sharply, causing the league to lose its appeal to top stars, who began prioritising competitions with a transparent image and a more stable competitive environment. The flow of finance and broadcasting rights was also affected, reducing clubs' capacity for long-term investment. Meanwhile, other leagues, such as the Premier League and La Liga, capitalised on this moment to widen the gap in commercial power and brand value. Most importantly, Calciopoli did not just break a few clubs or a single season. It effectively restructured the entire power system of Italian football. The links that had allowed Serie A to function as a unified ecosystem between the major clubs, between the league and the national team, between finance and sporting quality, were all disrupted. Juventus weakened, AC Milan entered a transitional phase, Inter emerged as a new force, but in a completely different context, and the national team no longer benefited from the stable foundation previously provided by the top clubs. In other words, Calciopoli was not merely a scandal to be dealt with, but a breaking point that forced Italian football to rebuild from the ground up. Yet this reconstruction took place in a changed environment, where the old advantages no longer existed and long-term consequences began to accumulate over time. And it was from here that deeper problems in the structure of Italian football started to become apparent. After Calciopoli in 2006, a backbone of Italian football began to break, and the most obvious consequence was instability throughout the system. The major clubs could no longer maintain the dominance and consistency they once had, especially with Juventus relegated to Serie B and AC Milan entering a transitional phase, resulting in talent no longer being concentrated around a few centres of power. This led to the national team losing a core of players formed within the same competitive environment. Previously, Italian players were often familiar with each other from club level, playing within the same tactical system, which made the transition to the national team seamless. But after 2006, the team had to piece together individuals from multiple clubs with different styles and operational approaches, significantly reducing cohesion and stability in play. When players no longer compete long-term in a unified environment, and the national team lacks the natural connection between clubs and country, the entire operational system of Italian football gradually loses the synchronisation that was once its greatest advantage. And this raises a bigger question. If the foundation is no longer as connected as before, can the tactical identity that brought Italy success still be maintained? The next problem for Italian football lies in the very talent production pipeline, which should continuously nurture and supply the next generation for Serie A and the national team, but has gradually become clogged. Young Italian players are increasingly given fewer opportunities to play at major clubs, where the pressure for results leads coaches to favour experienced players or signings ready to play immediately, rather than taking the risk of giving unproven talents a chance. As a result, many young Italian players are forced to leave the domestic environment to seek development opportunities in other leagues, notably the Bundesliga, where clubs tend to give more chances to young players and provide a clear development pathway. While this helps them gain playing time and grow, it also means that Serie A is no longer the direct environment for nurturing and accumulating the next generation for Italian football, as it once was. When young talents are not developed in a unified domestic ecosystem, they lack familiarity with the shared tactical philosophy, lack connection with future national teammates, and fail to form a generation with natural cohesion. This results in the national team not having a continuous and stable layer of top-level successor players. From an expert perspective, a strong footballing nation is not only about producing talent, but more importantly, about retaining them and providing conditions for them to develop within their own ecosystem. When the cycle of training accumulation competition transformation no longer occurs fully domestically, Italian football not only loses its competitive edge, but also its ability to sustain strength across generations. And from here, the question arises, what has caused this operational structure to weaken over time? Looking more closely at the structural perspective, the financial gap is not simply a matter of a rich or poor, but directly affects the entire operational chain of a league. In Serie A, many clubs remain heavily dependent on limited revenue from broadcasting rights and match days, while aging stadiums not only reduce the fan experience, but also restrict the ability to generate commercial income through hospitality, advertising, or non-football events. This slows the financial cycle of Serie A clubs, compared to their counterparts in England or Germany, where modern stadiums and multi-layered business models maximise revenue per match. The consequence is that Serie A clubs struggle to compete in the transfer market. They cannot consistently maintain high wages or large transfer fees, leading to the early sale of talent or an inability to retain players against competition from the Premier League, where abundant financial resources allow clubs not only to spend heavily, but also to invest long-term in squad. This creates a clear disparity in squad quality, especially when competing in European competitions where depth and financial stability often determine how far a team can progress. Finance also affects the ability to invest in academies, facilities, data analysis, and professional staff, elements that may seem are behind the scenes, but ultimately determine long-term competitive capacity. When resources are limited, clubs are forced to prioritise short-term gains rather than building a sustainable foundation, making it difficult to create a stable development cycle like in wealthier leagues. Therefore, Serie A's problem is not only the quality of play on the pitch, but also stems from lagging financial and commercial models. And when finance becomes a factor shaping long-term competitiveness, the question arises, can Serie A find a sufficiently distinct path to close this gap, or will the disparity continue to widen over time? From a temporal perspective, Italian football tactics have remained stuck in the early 2000s. Serie A's tradition has long been associated with tight defending, spatial control, and a slower tempo, where teams prioritise discipline, organisation, and safety over speed or directness. For many years, this was an advantage that allowed Italian clubs to succeed domestically and in Europe. But as modern football has evolved, that balance has gradually been disrupted. Today's football at the highest level, particularly in the Champions League, demands constant pressing intensity, ultra-fast transitions, and rapid decision-making in tight spaces. Top teams must not only defend well, but also proactively impose their game, press high, and maintain a very high tempo throughout the full 90 minutes. Compared to this standard, many Serie A teams still operate at a lower speed, apply less pressure in the opponent's half, and rely more on defensive structure than on comprehensive control of the game. This difference creates a noticeable gap when Italian clubs compete in Europe. They may be well organised, but struggle against modern pressing systems where even small errors are immediately exploited. Gradually, Serie A ceases to be an optimal environment for preparing for Champions League matches, as what works domestically is no longer sufficient to compete at the highest level. And when tactical thinking fails to keep pace with the global evolution of football, the problem is not confined to individual clubs, but becomes a systemic gap. The problems of Italian football do not stop at technical performance or match results, but also stem from long-standing cultural and operational structures. At the management level, the Italian Football Federation is often questioned over leadership effectiveness, consistency in strategy, and the ability to implement long-term reforms, leaving the system without a clear direction to adapt to modern football. At the same time, the transfer environment in Italy is heavily influenced by agents and networks of interest surrounding players, making squad building and talent development unstable and difficult to control. In some cases, allegations of misconduct within the system further increase skepticism about transparency, thereby affecting trust in the entire league. Overall, this is not a problem of a single generation of players or a few individual clubs, but the result of a system that has developed culturally ingrained operational habits over many years. These factors make change slow and complex and represent one of the biggest barriers preventing Italian football from regaining its former elite status. Serie A still exists, clubs continue to operate, and stadiums still host stands full of passionate fans. But beneath this surface lies a different reality. Italian football no longer holds a leading role as it once did. Matches continue regularly, and traditional clubs like Inter, AC Milan, and Juventus still carry their unique identities. Yet the overall quality of the league is often criticised for being slow-paced and less attractive compared to other top competitions. On the European stage, this decline is also evident as Serie A representatives no longer maintain the stability or frequency of deep runs in the Champions League that they once did. While there are occasional standout seasons, overall, the top-level competitiveness of Italian clubs has significantly diminished compared to the era when they dominated or were among Europe's leading forces. This creates a clear paradox. Italian football survives thanks to its history, culture, and fan devotion, but no longer retains its dominant status in increasingly intense and competitive modern football landscape. Italian football has not disappeared, nor is it a dead as many believe, but it is undergoing a cyclical transformation, where old foundations are no longer sufficient to operate in the new context. What we are witnessing is not a sudden collapse, but the accumulated consequence of years of a system slow to adapt, forcing Serie A and Italian football as a whole to enter a process of fundamental restructuring. At this stage, Italian football must simultaneously address multiple layers of issues: rebuilding financial models, improving infrastructure, and redefining youth development philosophies and how clubs operate tactically. More importantly, they need to rediscover the identity that once allowed them to dominate, but in a version suited to modern football, where speed, intensity, and tactical flexibility are decisive. From a long-term perspective, This is a process of rebalancing rather than total decline. Historically, major footballing nations have all experienced cycles of rise and fall, and Italy is no exception. The issue is not that they have completely lost their status, but that the old system failed to evolve quickly enough to maintain it in the face of changing global competition. Therefore, the adikeia often referred to may not be an ending, but rather the beginning of a new reconstruction cycle where the key question is whether Italian football can adapt quickly enough to re-enter the race at the very top. England have just delivered one of their worst performances in many years.
For sure it hurts, it's painful always to lose, and
a display that was disjointed, lacking direction, and almost entirely without identity. Yet the paradox is that they are still considered one of the favourites for the FIFA World Cup 2026. With a manager like Thomas Tuchel, a generation of players at their peak, including Harry Kane, Jude Bellingham and Declan Rice, and a squad that appears almost perfect on paper, England should be moving closer to the title. But reality is showing the opposite. The more perfect they are in terms of personnel, the more they expose a deeper issue in how they function. And that very imperfection may be the reason behind their failure. And England have always been regarded as genuine title contenders across generations. Under Thomas Tuchel, they possess a manager proven in knockout football, a squad reaching an ideal balance of age and experience, and a spine capable of competing with any national team in the world, with Harry Kane leading the line, Jude Bellingham at the centre, and Declan Rice providing the foundation behind. Beyond that, they retain one of the most reliable weapons at international level in their set-piece efficiency, while further forward, they boast a group of creative players capable of making the difference in any moment, such as Phil Foden and Cole Palmer. And when all these elements are placed together, it is difficult to deny that. On paper, this is a team that possesses all the conditions required to challenge for the FIFA World Cup title. But once you move away from what exists on paper and step into reality, the picture of England becomes worrying in a very specific way, one that is visible in almost every phase of play. Against Uruguay, they dominated possession, but most of it consisted of safe passes in midfield, with insufficient movement in the forward line to stretch the opposition's defence, meaning attacks were often stopped at the edge of the box. When possession was lost, the gap between midfield and defence was too large, allowing direct counter-attacks. In the match against Japan, the issues became even clearer. As the team was stretched vertically, attacking players like Phil Foden and Cole Palmer were frequently forced to drop deep to receive the ball, but had no clear combinations to follow, leading to turnovers in dangerous areas that immediately turned into counter-attacks. The conceded goal being a perfect example, where a single quick transition exposed the space between the lines. Across those two matches, a clear, systemic problem emerged. There is no stable build-up structure, no true centre controlling the tempo, and most importantly, no connection between the lines, making England look more like a collection of talented individuals than a well-organised team. And that is the most concerning issue heading into a tournament like the FIFA World Cup. If analysed at a deeper tactical level, the issue with England is not just a sense of disjointedness, but a systemic flaw that is clearly visible in how they operate during matches. First of all, they are using too many creative players such as Phil Foden, Cole Palmer and Anthony Gordon within the same structure. These players all tend to drift into central areas, preferring to receive the ball between the lines and create individual moments. The problem is that there is no one maintaining an organisational or positional control role, leading to multiple players occupying the same zones while other spaces are left empty. As a result, the attacking structure becomes compressed and far easier for opponents to contain. In the build-up phase, the problem becomes even clearer. England often circulate the ball horizontally between centre-backs and the holding midfielder that lack a vertical connection point. There is no player consistently positioned between the lines to receive, turn and carry the ball forward. This is precisely the role that Harry Kane usually fulfills when he drops deep. When Kane is absent, that space is almost completely vacant. The ball cannot be progressed smoothly and attacking sequences break down right through the central zone. This has a direct knock-on effect further forward. Players like Phil Foden or Cole Palmer are forced to drop deeper to participate in build-up, but when they receive the ball, there are no longer enough movement options ahead to combine with. The team becomes stretched vertically, with midfield and attack disconnected. As a result, attacking phases lack continuity and often end in individual actions or turnovers in tight spaces. The biggest issue emerges immediately after losing possession. Because too many players have pushed high and drifted into central areas, England almost have no defensive structure behind the ball. They lack proper arrest defence and also an organised first line of pressing. Once the opponent breaks through the initial pressure, the space behind becomes completely exposed. With just a single pass, the opposition can transition and attack the defensive line directly. These three issues do not exist in isolation. They are tightly interconnected. The lack of organisation in build-up forces individuals to solve situations on their own. That, in turn, leads to positional disorder and breaks the overall structure. And once the structure is lost, the team becomes extremely fragile in transition. Therefore, the problem with England is not about a few players underperforming. It lies in how the system itself is constructed. Where roles overlap, there is no true controlling hub, and the team does not yet function as a cohesive unit. The biggest paradox for England right now lies in the role of Harry Kane, because he's not just a striker, but effectively the central hub of the entire system. When Kane is present, the team immediately gains clear direction in their build-up. He frequently drops between the lines to receive the ball, creating a natural link between midfield and attack. From that position, Kane can turn, distribute to the flanks, or play line-breaking passes that open up space behind the opposition's defence. More importantly, his presence clarifies roles for those around him. Phil, Foden and Cole Palmer can move more freely, focusing on exploiting space rather than dropping too deep into build-up, while the midfield maintains its structure thanks to having a reference point ahead to connect with. But as soon as Harry Kane is absent, that entire mechanism almost disappears. The draw against Uruguay and the defeat to Japan were not just poor results, but clear evidence that England's system relies heavily on a single link. Without Kane, the space between the lines is left unoccupied. The ball cannot be progressed vertically and is often forced wide or recycled backwards into deeper areas. Attacking players are compelled to drop deep to receive possession, but that in turn removes their presence in the final third, leaving the team without a true finishing reference. Scoring just one goal across those two matches is therefore not simply a finishing issue, but the direct consequence of failing to establish a stable attacking structure. The alternative experiments only make the issue more visible. When using Dominic Calvert-Lewin as a centre forward, England gain a target for aerial balls but completely lose central connectivity. Calvert-Lewin does not naturally drop deep to participate in build-up, nor does he possess the same distribution ability as Harry Kane, which causes a clear disconnection between midfield and attack. On the other hand, switching to a false nine option with Phil Foden does not solve the problem, and instead makes it more complex. Foden tends to drift wide and drop deep to receive the ball, which removes any fixed reference point in central areas to structure positioning, leading surrounding players to move on instinct and creating an attacking structure that is unstable and easily disrupted. What is striking is that both of these options fail in different ways, yet lead to the same outcome. England are no longer functioning as a complete system. And that is the core paradox. They need Harry Kane to provide structure, to connect the lines, and to ensure the team operates smoothly. But at the same time, that very dependence makes the system fragile, because if Kane is not at his best or unavailable, the entire way the team plays immediately loses its foundation. This is not just a personnel issue, but a tactical limitation. A team can perform well because of an individual, but it is very difficult to win a title if it cannot function when that individual is absent. The defeat to Japan was not simply a disappointing friendly result, but in reality, a turning point that exposed the full extent of England's issues. It was a rare occasion where they had to operate their system without Harry Kane, and it quickly became a test they failed to pass. What is more concerning lies in the way they conceded. Japan did not need a complex move or a long sequence to make the difference. A single quick transition was enough to exploit the space between England's lines and produce a goal. That illustrates how their defensive structure in moments of transition is almost non-existent, especially when the team has pushed high without preparing for the defensive phase. This is not an individual mistake, but the direct consequence of a system lacking balance. On the other hand, England also failed to create genuinely clear chances. They had possession and control, but no real way to break down the opposition's defence through structured combinations. Attacks often ended before they became truly dangerous. This reflects a deeper issue. The team not only lacks efficiency, but also lacks a clear enough attacking structure to consistently generate chances. The reaction from the crowd and media after the match only highlighted the seriousness of the situation. The frustration did not come from losing a friendly, but from the feeling that this team is not ready for a major tournament. And that is the true meaning of this defeat. It is not an accident, but a warning that if these systemic issues are not resolved, England may enter the FIFA World Cup with great expectations, yet without a strong enough foundation to turn those expectations into reality. At this point, the issue with England no longer lies in minor details of their play, but has become evident at a foundational level. They do not lack quality players. In fact, quite the opposite, as they possess one of their most talented generations in years. What they lack, however, is a system strong enough to function when their biggest star, Harry Kane, is absent. When Kane plays, everything appears to connect naturally, but that is not a sign of a strong system. It is a sign of a system relying on an individual to operate. A top team can be built around a star, but it cannot depend entirely on that star to exist. England right now are walking a very fine line between those two concepts. They have talent across every line, from creativity to defence, from control to unpredictability. But those talents are not placed within a structure clear enough to complement one another. Instead of forming a cohesive system where each individual elevates the collective, they become disconnected pieces that only truly link together when there is a central figure like Kane holding everything in place. Therefore, the real issue for England is not a lack of quality, but a lack of a mechanism to translate that quality into effectiveness. They do not lack talent, but they lack a way to connect that talent into a system capable of functioning consistent in all circumstances. And in elite football, especially in a tournament like the FIFA World Cup, that is the factor that ultimately defines the difference between a team that merely looks like a contender and one that can truly become champions. England does not lie in changing a few names and rebuilding the way the system operates. The first and most important step is to develop a style of play that does not rely entirely on Harry Kane. That does not mean finding a second Kane, because a profile like his is almost impossible to replace, but rather changing how the team builds up and connects its lines, so the system can still function even when its most important link is absent. Once the team no longer depends on a single individual as the central connector, the entire structure will be forced to become clearer and more disciplined. From there, the next step is to establish a new tactical centre. Jude Bellingham can become the focal point thanks to his ability to move between the lines, arrive in the box, and contribute across all phases of play, while Declan Rice offers a different solution with his role in controlling tempo from deeper areas, helping the team maintain structure during build-up. Whichever direction is chosen, the key is for England to have a clear operational spine, rather than relying on the spontaneous fluidity of individuals. At the same time, Thomas Tuchel must address the issue of a creative overload. Trying to fit all attacking talents, like Phil Foden and Cole Palmer, into the same system may create huge potential, but it also risks role overlap if responsibilities are not clearly defined. An effective team is not the one with the most creative players, but the one that places each player in the right position with the right function. In that context, optimizing set-piece situations becomes a more practical and reliable solution. This has long been one of the traditional strengths of England. And in the knockout environment of the FIFA World Cup, where space and opportunities are both limited, sets often prove decisive. Making the most of this aspect can allow England to maintain effectiveness even when their open play structure has not yet reached its optimal level. Finally, they need to become more pragmatic, especially in knockout matches. That is also the tactical identity of Thomas Tuchel, prioritising structure, controlling risk, and maximising efficiency rather than pursuing an overly open style of play. In a tournament like the FIFA World Cup, knowing how to win matters more than playing beautifully. If your backup plan is simply to replicate what you do in your primary system, then in reality, you do not have a backup plan at all. And that is exactly what England must change if they truly want to turn their potential into a title. England may enter the FIFA World Cup 2026 with their most complete squad in years. The history of major tournaments has never belonged to the team that looks most perfect on paper. The World Cup is not won by the side with more stars, but by the one with fewer problems in decisive moments. And when England are measured against that standard, a major question immediately emerges. Can they truly control their own weaknesses? Because at this moment, despite everything they possess, England are still carrying a fundamental issue. They have yet to prove that they can function as a complete system without Harry Kane on the pitch. This is no longer a minor tactical detail, but a flaw that could define their entire journey in the tournament. And that is also the biggest question Thomas Tuchel must answer before the FIFA World Cup begins. If Harry Kane is not at his best, if he cannot maintain his usual influence, or simply if opponents find a way to neutralise him, then what happens to the entire system? Can England still control matches, create chances and win, or will they once again fall into the same disjointed state seen in recent games? Because at the highest level, the gap between a title contender and an eliminated team can come down to a single detail. And for England, that detail may be the fact that they still do not know how to play without Harry Kane. If you enjoy our video, don't forget to hit like to help this video reach to other football lovers, and hit the subscribe button to follow for more interesting videos about football stories. See you in the next video.